Thank you very much for having me. Driving up here from New Bedford, I was thought of my mom. A couple years ago, I was helping her plan her end-of-life affairs, right? And she said to me, she says, Jeff, I want you to know that I'm already taken care of. I've donated my body to science. University of New England is going to take me, and I've donated my body to science. And I said, Mom, you sure you know what you're doing here? You know, my mom grew up in rural Maine, didn't get her high school diploma until she was in her 60s, so I was a little concerned. And she said, Jeff, I'm finally going to college. Driving up here, I said, I know how you feel, Mom. So what I'd like to talk about is our recent work that is going on right now in Massachusetts. It's extremely exciting. We're bringing a brand new technology to the state of Massachusetts to solve a big problem here in the state. And that's what we really want to talk about today. But to give you a history, a little bit of where I came from, the spiny dogfish shark is a species that swims from Maine to North Carolina. They swim in massive schools. And in Europe, they developed a market for it because it's in Europe as well. And they overfished it in Europe. So the Europeans came here in the 1980s, and my older brother started working with them to process it. We now work with the government of the US and Canada. Because I've worked so long with dogfish, I know how to keep it sustainable. And so we've established a certified sustainable fishery in North America, including Canada. But what they catch the dogfish for, if you look at this upper right, the middle piece of meat is the back, and they use that for fish and chips in Europe. If you're in prison or in college in Europe and you get fish and chips, you're getting dogfish. And everybody thinks, they're feeding us that because it's this trash fish. Really, why they're feeding it to you is that humans are not allergic to dogfish. Dogfish does not have the protein that makes us allergic. It's called parvalbumin B. So they feel confident serving it and never having any kind of issue with someone getting allergic reaction. So the two pieces of meat, top and bottom, are what they call the belly flap. It's abdomen meat. And we have to fillet that by hand because it's smoked in Germany as a delicacy. They hang it in a smokehouse and it curls up. They call it Schillerlocken because they had a leader named Schiller with curly hair. So what happens with the fishermen, normally when you catch cod, you gut it at sea. You put a knife down it and pull the guts out, and then it stays fresh longer. You can't trust a fisherman not to mess up that cut. The boat's doing this, and if you miss a little bit, you ruin the most expensive part of the fish. So they bring it with the guts in every day. They go out in the morning, come in with fish in the afternoon. So we butcher it in the fish house, and we end up with these guts on the left here. And for years, I never thought about what those guts look like, the color of the guts. There's a very wide, diverse color in those guts. And we're doing this as we're eating, so I should go quick. But every mineral has a color associated with it. If you do a mass spec test to test for mineral content, cobalt is blue, iron is red. So when you see that wide color variety, you know you have a lot of minerals in there. What they've recently discovered in the last 5 years is that the minerals in fish, 90% of them reside in the liver and stomach. So when we talk about land erosion here on our farmland, that land erodes into the rivers, ends up in the mouth of the rivers, gets filtered out by clams, oysters. Those things get eaten by fish. Biological magnification puts those minerals back into the fish. When we take these guts and put it onto the land, we're recycling these trace minerals. And what we found looking at the trace minerals is a wide variety of really exciting minerals in there that we don't even know exactly what they do. But having that wide variety is important. So what my partner and I invented was an enzymatic digestion process. We use to turn those fish guts into liquid. We do it in 2 hours. The fastest and best way to do it is to mimic what fish do. Fish eat fish, they digest it. So we mimicked and built these basically big fish stomachs in our plant. So we use fish enzymes and just accelerate the process. So we turn it into liquid and it's in its natural state. and then we package it as organic GEM. We've been doing this since 1994. That was at the beginning of this organic, demand, and we were so lucky to be part of that because we got to work with the real mavens in that industry. Back then they called themselves biological farmers. They're like, we're farming biology here. We're feeding biology, we're farming biology. Today, they refer to themselves as regenerative farmers, and most of them do a very heavy cover crop rotation these days. This is from an agronomy book from 1971. They did not teach this in college from the mid-70s until recently. So 10, 15 years ago when I would pop this up at talks, farmers didn't know what I was talking about. But thankfully, with this wave of regenerative farming going on, this has now become a more common knowledge. So how plants grow. Farmers will tell you, oh, you put fertilizer in the ground and they suck up the nutrients and they grow. Well, that sounds good, but explain to me how the redwoods grow in California. Never been fertilized, hundreds of feet tall, thousands of years old. Every plant around the world grows the same way. They take sunlight and CO2 in the presence of photosynthesis, magnesium and phosphorus. They convert that to sugar, and they use half that sugar to grow. Everybody knows, photosynthesis, right? But what people don't realize is that the other half of their sugar generation, they put out through the root zone. And they're feeding bacteria, fungi, protozoa, other organisms in that root zone. Those are the things that go out, chelate minerals, and bring energy back to the plant. So they have a symbiotic relationship with the microbes in the soil. Without the microbes, they die. And if you kill the microbes, you can grow plants in a sterile environment, but you have to feed them constantly with nutrient. How they grow naturally is this way, and that is the most efficient way to grow and the most healthy way to grow a plant. So as these bacteria and fungi grow, they go out and they bring enzymes, minerals, growth regulators, and hormones back to the plant. And the plant keeps putting out sugar. So the more nutrients they bring the plant, the more sugar the plant puts out. This is how plants grow all over the world. It's why our fertilizer is used all over the world. We're doing a big project on cocoa in Ghana, which is very exciting. We've been in Peru for years, Korea, all over North America. And the reason why is that our fish is a perfect food for biology. And what we do is once we have our liquid, we stabilize it, we bring the pH down. When it gets to the farm, they'll put water to it, put it in the ground, and then the soil microbes explode. They go crazy. And once they go crazy, they start bringing nutrients to the plant. Everywhere we go that anybody's ever used our product has a healthy plant. There's a lot more that goes into producing nutrient-dense food and high yield, which we know how to do that as well. But the core of putting our product into the ground is it explodes biology. And you have a healthy plant when you do that. And I'd love to come back someday and talk to you all about nutrient density, because that is organics. So you go to the store today, and I'm off target, but if you take a refractometer and test the bricks in the supermarket, you'll be lucky if you see a 4 brick on anything they sell you. Our growers are putting out, they're upset if they have less than 8. 10, 11 is the average for the growers that we work with, bricks level. And that's the mineral density in your food. And so you're hearing it here today. You'll soon, at one point, be buying your food based on bricks content. I love organics because it means there's no pesticide or fungicide or GMO in your food, but it doesn't tell you that it's quality food. And the quality measurement is in bricks. So for the talk today, this is in 2008. We were asked to come down and be part of a project at Iowa Golf Course. This is in Florida. This is where Tiger Woods used to live. It's where he had the big fight with his wife and ran into the tree. And we were asked to come down because they had a problem with nutrient runoff. This is a golf course surrounded by bodies of water. Golf courses are worse than farmers in terms of overuse of fertilizer. There's a tremendous amount of runoff. So they had eutrophication going on in this pond. Eutrophication is nutrient runoff going into the pond and creating all kinds of algae growth, depleting the ponds of water, of oxygen, and then of life. And then you get all kinds of weed growth. Eutrophication is a pond transitioning into a wetland and then actual land. But here at Isleworth, we were brought down because Ecological Labs was in the pond putting their biology in the water to clean it up. And they were having tremendous success, but the state wanted to stop the nutrient runoff from the golf course. So Isleworth Golf Course built a 50-foot barrier around each one of their bodies of water. And with their irrigation system, they injected our fish in there and got the biology to explode like we know that it does. So we had this explosion of biology, and that biology was arresting nutrient runoff coming off the golf course. So it was eating it and holding it in place in the form of biology. And then plants take up that biology, but when the food source went down at certain times of the year, the biology that Ecological Labs makes will eat that biology when it dies. It'll eat the nutrients that biology gives up when it dies. So we were arresting it in place and then converting it to nitrogen. The bacteria that ELI uses will denitrify nitrates. It's really, really exciting. So it'll take it from a nitrate to a nitrite and then release the nitrogen gas. So we stopped the fertilizer runoff coming into this pond and kept the pond clean after ELI had denitrified the pond. So just to give you a look, this is Isleworth Golf Course. You can see these golf courses right on top of the water. And it's such an easy access to run nutrients off into the water. Nitrate fertilizer is a very common fertilizer used. It's water soluble and it leaches very easily. So farmers will tell you, environmentalists will tell you, do not put that out before a rain event. Because if the plant doesn't immediately take it up, it washes into the water. Eutrophication, as I was saying, is excessive nutrients getting into a body of water. It'll cause dense growth of plant life and death of animal life from lack of oxygen. This is a good picture of eutrophication. You'll see this matting on the surface. Frequently, it'll be lily pads, which are weeds here. And you can see in the littoral phase where the ground slopes into the pond, there was all this growth of these like cat nine tails or certain grasses. They grow very heavy here in Massachusetts in the littoral phase. Once you've seen this, you'll be driving around here in Massachusetts, you'll see it everywhere. Like, oh geez, that's eutrophying, that's eutrophying. And then you look and go, well, what's it near? Frequently it'll be near a farm. It'll be near a lot of houses with septic tanks. Once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. So this is the process of eutrophication. On the left is what a healthy ecosystem is like. It has plants that are submerged. They're not floating on the surface. It has shellfish on the bottom that are filter feeders. You'll have all kinds of fish in there. You'll have a small amount of balanced algae because even in the healthiest environment, you do get some mineralization that comes out of the atmosphere when it rains. So in a balanced, healthy ecosystem, it's what's going on the left. On the right is an ecosystem that has too much vegetation, too much nutrient. When you have that nutrient, you have loss of underwater vegetation, you have loss of the shellfish that are filtering, you have algae blooms. Algae grows from sunlight and CO2 and nutrients. That's all algae needs is sunlight, CO2, and nitrate. So you have sunlight, CO2, excessive nitrate, boom, algae bloom. Algae dies, goes to the bottom, decomposes, and when the process of decomposing, it's taking oxygen out of the water, and then that's when you have a fish kill, when you have too much of that. So the reason why this is a hot topic today is because of toxic algae blooms. You may have read about them. In 2019, the mayoral race in Southampton, Long Island, the #1 issue in the mayoral race was, what are we going to do about the pond? The lake. They have a big lake in Southampton. Dogs last summer were dying in that lake. And so the mayoral race was decided on who had the better plan to clean the lake. This is a sign on Sassaquin Pond in New Bedford. You're not allowed to swim in this pond because this pond has frequent algae blooms. It is surrounded by houses with septic tanks. And they all live on this house because it's on this little pond and they can't swim in it. This is an aerial photograph of Lake Okeechobee from 2016. You can see the color inside Lake Okeechobee, that is a massive algae bloom in Lake Okeechobee. Huge, huge lake filled with algae in 2016. The same event happened in 2018. Now in 2016, they managed it. It didn't go anywhere. In 2018, what happened was Lake Okeechobee is a reservoir. And when the level gets too high, they have to let it go because it's a man-made reservoir. And if you remember what happened with Katrina in New Orleans, they were using man-made earthen dams in combination with cement dams to hold back the water, right? When the water level got too high and a hurricane came through, it broke free and flooded out New Orleans. So Florida, they're terrified of that because they get hurricanes, very frequently. So when the water level in Okeechobee gets too high, they have to let it out. Well, in 2018, we're coming into hurricane season. The water level was too high. They had to dump it. Well, what they dumped was this massive amount of water loaded with algae. That algae flowed down through these ecosystems and started killing plant life and killing marine life everywhere it went because it was loaded with toxic blue-green algae. So it is a serious, serious problem. So Lake Okeechobee is one issue in Florida. It was built specifically to drain the Everglades so that they could farm it. Because the bottom of a pond is a muck layer, and it's really great for growing things. South of Lake Okeechobee, you have 500,000 acres of sugarcane. And when they first started growing it, they didn't have to use much fertilizer because the muck was so rich, right? And if you ever drive south of Lake Okeechobee, just look around. I was driving down there my first time, and I said, geez, why do they build these roads so high? I'm way up here, and the top of the sugar cane's down here. It's 11 feet, up below. Well, what happened was when they first planted the sugar cane, it was at road level. Every time they harvest it, they lose a little bit of muck, And now that muck layer is very near bedrock, they have to use a lot of fertilizer. So now they're using fertilizer. It's running off right through the Everglades, right out the bottom of Florida. Almost annually, they have a red tide event at the bottom of Florida. And here's an aerial photograph of it. A couple of years, it's been massive, where the algae bloom actually blew eastward and went up the east side of Florida and terrified people in Fort Lauderdale and Miami. So dogs are particularly vulnerable to blue-green algae, and this is why it's in the news. Dogs are dying from just swimming in ponds. This is obviously an extreme picture of blue-green algae. Dogs have a reaction to blue-green algae. They live for about an hour after being exposed to it in a toxic level. So I pray for this dog. But that's why it's in the news. You can kill marine life, you can kill aquatic plant life, but kill my dog? We got to do something. So what are the nutrients that are ending up in these waterways? It's nitrogen and phosphorus are the two main things. Where does that come from? It comes from decaying plant matter, human and animal waste. We don't think about it, but our urine is very high in nitrogen. And our septic tanks and our wastewater treatment facilities don't do a great job. Septic tanks don't do anything for it. It passes right through, but you don't think about how much nitrogen we're actually putting into the environment with our urine. Detergents, soaps are a common pollutant specifically for phosphorus. And the big one is fertilizer, not just farms, but homes. And I'll show you a picture here of Florida of an excellent example of that, how a farmer uses too much nitrogen. I can tell you that straight up. And those guys are on a budget. They're making money. They're entrepreneurs. They're counting their pennies, and they use too much. And plants, Americans, we eat too much food. Plants, if you give it too much nitrogen, they get sick too. And it's one of the problems in agriculture today that we're trying to correct, to get farmers to understand, to use less, you get a healthier crop. But, so a farmer may use maybe 100 pounds per acre of too much nitrogen. A homeowner will, his little 1,000 square foot lawn, will use a lot more than 100 pounds per acre in excess of what they need. It's just so easy, and they're not on a tight budget. So the nutrient that we're going to focus on today is nitrogen, because nitrogen is something we can do something with. Nitrogen can be turned into a gas. It can be denitrified. Phosphorus is nothing we can do with it. It's a mineral. I can't get it out. So when you have a phosphorus problem in your ponds, you either have to chemically react it out or you have to physically dredge it out. But nitrogen we can work with, and nitrogen is the biggest pollutant that there is in ponds and waterways. So how rain is supposed to be absorbed naturally. In an undeveloped area, rain will come down. If you've got big trees, you've got a big root zone, a lot of biology down there. Those trees are making sugar, putting out in the root zone, feeding bacteria. There's all kinds of life in the soil. So the rain comes down. The biology will hold that rain and let it perk slowly. And then slowly it'll recharge the groundwater, and it won't run off into local waterways. In a non-natural environment, particularly cities in the upper left, you walk around Boston, you don't see much green space. When it rains, the rain is landing on the roof, the street, and it's running to a storm drain. And when it's running to that storm drain, it's washing everything off, what little bit of green space there is, but off the streets. And there's a lot of nutrient on the street. Think of oil. There's a tremendous amount of little droplets of oil that cars leak. It accumulates on streets, it rains, those hydrocarbons wash off into the water. So there's also plant trash and other things, nutrients that are in a city that wash in. We have discharge from municipal sewage plants. They don't do a great job with it. And you can see in areas where these tubes are discharging, you can see a tremendous amount of muck growth underneath the river and on the bottom of the bed. Cars and industry will produce NOx gases. Farms certainly have runoff. Streets in just suburban areas, and runoff from mining and construction. Those things all end up in the ecosystem. So what I want to show you about, I robbed liberally from the EPA. So this is one of their slides that I grabbed. I like it because you don't think about how much urine animals are putting into the ground, our pets outside, and how much, you don't think about the little bit of lawn fertilizer I put out, could it have a detrimental effect? You don't think about it. And what people on Martha's Vineyard don't think about, and it's a big problem there, is their septic tanks. And so how a septic tank works is, you flush your toilet, it goes to this containment piece where the solids drop out, and then the fats float to the surface. And then in the next chamber, the gray water, they call it, goes out through a leach field. The urine that goes in there, nothing is done with it. It goes right into the leach field. That nutrient goes right into the ground. And if you don't have good biology in the ground to eat that up, if you have too much rain or hard pan, it ends up in the waterways. And on Martha's Vineyard, 60% of the nitrogen in the ponds on Martha's Vineyard is coming from septic tanks. I love this slide from the EPA. Different areas have different problems. Their nutrients are coming from different things. This is Sarasota, Florida. You can see that 61% of their nutrient loading is coming from stormwater runoff. Well, why is that? Sarasota, Florida is a place that everybody has really nice lawns. They use a lot of lawn fertilizer in Sarasota. So when you get a rain event, they're using too much, it washes out, it ends up into the ocean right in front of Sarasota. Wastewater is part of it. Atmospheric deposits is 14%. So you do have some coming in the rain, but there they have a home fertilizer issue. Here in Chesapeake Bay, they have a different problem. Now look at the size of this colored area is the watershed for Chesapeake Bay. So water for Chesapeake Bay comes from as far away as New York. What are the pollutants? Where are the pollutants coming from in Chesapeake Bay? The largest amount is from atmospheric deposits, which is interesting, and then also chemical fertilizer from agriculture and homes. So if you're going to attack the problem in Chesapeake Bay, the first thing you want to go after is agricultural fertilizer. So, okay, I got a pond with algae, right? And this is what happened in Massachusetts 2 years ago that got us involved, is there's a pond in New Bedford called Buttonwood Pond, right? And a lot of people go there to fish. They used to go there for swimming, but because of the algae, now they just fish. So 2 years ago, they had an algae bloom, and oh, we got to do something, and the city got very afraid, so they contracted a company to come in with an algaecide. We're just going to kill it. We'll get rid of that, no problem. So they came out and they sprayed the algaecide. What happens when you spray algaecide? Now, Buttonwood Pond it's got algae, so it's already in eutrophication. It already has a heavy layer of muck on the bottom. It already has all kinds of invasive weeds. So when they put this algaecide on the algae and killed it, it dropped it right to the bottom and started to decay. Now, algae grows in heat, in warm area. It needs heat energy. And that's also when bacteria is very active. So they did this spray in July. 10 days after that spray, they had a massive fish kill in Buttonwood Pond. And it made front page news, and it was a really big deal. They shut the pond down, and we read that in the news, and my partner Lou sent the news article to me, and he said, Jeff, this is in our backyard. I think we need to get involved. And so I said, okay, and I reached out to the city and said, look, we got to stop what you're doing. And how do we stop that? So what we did is our process is a three-stage thing. So we use these microbes called microbe lift that are made by ecological labs. We put that in the pond. Those microbes go to work, and I'll show you exactly what they do, but they denitrify the nutrients in the pond. They take those nutrients and put it back in the atmosphere where it belongs. Our air is made up of 74% nitrogen, somewhere in there. So we're putting nitrogen back where it belongs. So when we talk about microbe lift in the biology, when I first brought it to Massachusetts, they were like, whoa, we have a reg on the books from 2004. You are not allowed to put any biology into the state-run waterways. You're banned, we're afraid of it. And what's funny is that this same biology, you can go to PepsiCo and buy it right off the shelf, the exact same thing. They use it at PepsiCo to clean their aquarium tanks. And when PepsiCo first started using it around 2000, they did a study, so we're going to study it. So they started using microbe lift, and what they found was that their labor cost store-wide dropped 30%. They were spending a massive amount of time cleaning the tanks. But better than that is that their mortality rate on fish dropped 70%. The fish liked this clean water. They weren't dying like they had been. So PepsiCo has it in every single one of their stores here in the United States. Been that way for at least 12 or 13 years. And you can go buy it right off the shelf. So when I got stopped by at the state level, Buttonwood Pond, I went to them with a project, and they said, yeah, let's do it. They were very cautious, but they wanted to do it because they had such a bad experience with algaecide. And so I went to the state with just step one, treating we're going to clear the pond. And they were very like, we got to study it and look at this. And I said, well, we've been selling it here in the state for 13 years. But that's okay. We're working with UMass, is monitoring everything we're doing at Buttonwood Pond. We're proving it to the state level so that they will allow us to commercialize microbe lift. But step two of the process is we use organic GEM, which is our fertilizer, and we put a couple of catalysts with it that are actually made by ecological labs that enhance photosynthesis. But what we're doing at Buttonwood Pond is we're creating a biobarrier around it, just like we did at Isleworth Golf Course. So we're trying to arrest nutrient runoff coming off the land. The problem we have at Buttonwood Pond is there are 7 storm drains feeding this pond. It's a 9-acre pond, 7 storm drains. And so we have a lot on our hands in terms of nutrient loading, more than just what's surface runoff, which we can control surface runoff with that biobarrier. The third part of what we do, which we're not focused on yet with Buttonwood Pond, but we're starting a project on Martha's Vineyard in the spring to start treating septic systems to stop the runoff there using the same 2 technologies. So this is Buttonwood Pond. Yours truly there in the center, hard at work, as you can see, as usual. We're the biology comes in these 275-gallon totes from ecological labs, and it's stable. They have a novel technology where their bacteria is stable. It's constantly producing and eating and producing and eating. It's alive inside the container, and it's really exciting. So they don't have to put any stabilizer in it. It's constantly growing and dying and growing and dying. So what we do is we put it in a little 8-foot boat and go out, and a 10-foot boat, and go out and we just distribute it throughout the pond. And you can see, this is buttonwood, you can see all the lily pads here. There's a tremendous amount of eutrophication in this pond. Another way to apply it, we do it from the shore. If it's a small enough pond, you can spray it to get it throughout the pond. The biology, you could dump it in one area, and it would eventually make its way to where the nutrients are, but it's just faster to spread it around the water. So this is an aerial photograph of Buttonwood Pond. In the very center, that is an island with a tree on it. The rest of this is all growth. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, that's where all the weeds are, the tall reeds on the shoreline, the littoral phase. So Buttonwood Pond is 9 acres of pond, but you can only see 6 acres of water. So they have 3 acres of lily pads and algae growth in the pond. So it's in a definite high eutrophication state. And you'll see where all the algae is up at the north end of the pond, and all the lily pads, the massive density of it. That's where the biggest storm drain is that comes into the pond. So, you know, the nutrients are coming in there, and that's where all the growth is happening. So we started treating the pond in July of last year. We wanted to start in May like we normally would, but the state held us up. So we didn't get out there till July, and everyone was panicked because that's when the algae bloom happened last year or the year before, and that's when the fish kill happened. I had to, put my firstborn child on the line with the town of New Bedford that we will not have an algae bloom, because they were terrified. Like, oh, do we just put algaecide out? You know, they were very nervous, and I had to promise them on my life that as long as we get in before an algae bloom, we will not have one. This biology works that fast. So we eat up enough nutrients so that you're not going to get an algae bloom. And so that was issue number 1 that they were concerned about. Issue number 2 was they told me, if you kill a fish here, we're going to run you out of town. One more fish kill, you know, you're gone. And despite the fact that I would take that and turn it into fertilizer if it did happen, you know, didn't mitigate their worries. But what I like to show here is we got a very late start, getting it in July. We did not have an algae bloom. We did not have a fish kill. And what I like to show here, and it's a little hard to see, but on the top, what we found was every time I'd go down to check on the pond, and we were doing, at first we do a weekly application for 5 weeks straight, and then monthly applications. So after the first 4 or 5 weeks, every time I went down to the pond, fish would jump right in front of me. So on that upper left-hand picture is fish swimming away from me. On the right, they're jumping. And then what we saw later in the summer was the fishermen came back and started fishing the pond again. So as we clean up ponds, before even we see it in the data, because what happens with nutrients, they end up in the muck layer of the pond. They fall, and that's where the nutrients are. We put our biology in there, and that's where they're working, right? They're releasing nutrient. And it's hard to measure it at first, what's going on, but you see the change before you see it in the data. And that's what we saw here in Buttonwood Pond. UMass is saying, hey, the nitrogen levels aren't going down, they're not going down, they're not going down, but the muck layer is reducing. So the nitrogen testing in the water wasn't showing it, but the muck layer, they were measuring it. They said, something's going on. But we were able to see it visually. So on the left-hand side, the first day of application, I went out and took pictures. It's a little hard to see, but in here, this is the bottom of the pond, and it's covered in a muck layer, right near the edge of the pond. And I just happened to take that photo randomly. In October, I went back to the same spot and took this picture to the right, and you can see how the muck layer has receded, and you see there's a lot of trash in this pond, believe me. But this is a lot of seashells. You can see seashells. So every week, UMass sends a person out and they test the pond, right? And about 4 or 5 weeks into it, she came to me. She said, I don't know what's going on, but there's mussels in this pond. She says, I've been working in this pond for years. I've never seen mussels. Where do they come from? Are you guys growing mussels? Like, what's going on? What was happening was the reduction of the muck layer in this pond exposed these shells so that you could see them. So they weren't live mussels she was seeing. They were old mussels that were dead, but had been covered in muck. So we're exposing that as the muck receded. So the Buttonwood Pond is in a high state of eutrophication. Generally takes 3 years to bring it all the way around. But in that short period of time, from July 26 until October, we saw a visual change in the pond, which was very exciting to us. How does it work? The bacteria, there's a lot of different nutrients in the pond, so you need a wide range of bacteria to digest it, to break it down. So what Ecological Labs has done is they've gone out to ponds and sourced the bacteria. They've gone out, sourced it out of ponds, and they take it back to the lab and they grow it out and stress test it. They stress it so that through biological magnification and through natural selection, it makes this bacteria super strong and super aggressive. So it can really do its job well. And one of the other things that the biggest key to what they do is they discovered a purple photosynthetic bacteria. This bacteria works just like algae. It just needs sunlight and CO2 to grow, and it'll denitrify. So it uses anoxic respiration, sunlight and CO2, and it will denitrify nitrogen. And what happens is, if you go into a pond, right, and just take a bunch of biology and throw it in the pond, right, it'll work. You'll see, whoa, hey, the nutrient levels are going down. This biology's eating up all the nutrient. Hey, this is great, it's working. Well, when the food source goes down, this biology dies, and it gives its nutrients back to the pond. You can't create or destroy matter, right? You can only change its state. So biology's eating it, but as soon as they die, they give it up. Where the purple photosynthetic bacteria comes in is as they give up that nutrient, purple photosynthetic bacteria works on it and continues to denitrify it. It doesn't need the food source. Food source has gone down. It's in the fall, or the nutrient loading is low. So this biology is giving it back up. The purple photosynthetic bacteria keeps working and keeps denitrifying it. And it is the key to why this whole project works. And when I took this to the state, they're like, yeah, 15 years ago we looked at biology, it works on paper but not in practice. You need to go talk to Dr. Howes at UMass, he's our water expert. And I'm talking to him and going, yeah, he's going, yeah. And I talked about purple photosynthetic bacteria. He sat right up and he said, I've observed that in nature. And he said, you have my attention. And Dr. Howes has been a big friend to us ever since, because he had seen that work, but had never seen it reproduced and used as a product. We're not, some of my text is not coming up through here. The Ecological Labs, the things that they do, they have a wide consortium of bacteria that they go and harvest. The second thing that makes them really different is they invented a fermentation process that is different. Now I'm looking at a lot of college kids, right? When you hear fermentation, the first thing you think of is a brew pub. I did. And then you go to a brew pub, you see these, big vessels where they're brewing beer. And that's all a fermentation process. And I can tell you, I've been in some of the big companies here in the US that grow biology for agriculture. They all do it the same way in these big fermenters. At Ecological Labs, I walked in and I said, what are you doing here? There's no stainless steel, reactors. There's no big fermentation going on. They do it in a completely unique and different way. And then while they're fermenting it, they're stressing that biology all the time and getting that, natural selection and making an aggressive, high-quality product. I had to let it come in. There we go. So they use selective adaptations for that. So functional diversity, their fermentation method, and the fact that they have this wide variety of microbes. So these are all the different types of microbes that they have in their product. Each one of these works in a different way, and you have to have it in there because you don't know what's going on in the specific environment. So if you have the right biology there, whatever's going on in that environment, that particular microbe will take off. So they have a wide variety of microbes that do a wide variety of things. Some need CO2, some need organic matter, some need compounds to get their energy from. And so as I was saying about the selective adaptations, where they use natural selection to make these things really, really strong and enhance what they can do. I love this little, this slide is from Ecological Labs. They say here at the second bullet point that the technologies that they developed were believed to be impossible to achieve. And I can tell you that's true when I'm talking to the, MEPA is the office here in Boston that controls all the environmental things in the state. I'm talking to their scientists, they don't know what I'm talking about. I talk to UMass, they don't know what I'm talking about. But we're bringing it to them and teaching them what this technology can do and how great ELI has been over the past 40 years developing it. The big thing that I had to get through everybody's understanding here in Massachusetts was when you talk about putting a bacteria into the waterway, everyone's thinking, oh goodness, we're going to have an outbreak, we're going to have an outbreak. This product doesn't go anywhere. All bacteria has a slime layer on it. When we put this into ponds, it immediately attaches to the nutrient. And Ecological Labs told me that originally and said, oh, we've tested it, da-da-da. I had UMass duplicate that testing. So we tested the water before we put the biology out. Put the biology out, 15 minutes later, they tested it again. The plate counts in the water actually went down slightly. They're like, you put all this bacteria in here, where did it go? It immediately attached to the nitrates that were suspended in the water. Attaches right to the food source. It goes to work. So it doesn't leave the waterway. It doesn't convert it to any kind of pathogen. It just goes to work on eating nitrogen. So here's a picture of bacteria. We call this Mr. Bug. So you can kind of get an understanding of what bacteria does. In the upper left, it looks like Pac-Man. That's not how bacteria eats. Bacteria has to absorb its nutrients. They do that by releasing enzymes that break the nutrients down, and then they absorb it into the cell wall. What happens, if you look at this bottom layer, cell loading is what goes on in the muck layer of ponds. A typical cell loading is what they call FOG, fats, oils, and grease. Everybody here knows don't put your bacon fat down the sink, right? It's because bacteria has a really hard time breaking it down. All kinds of other organic matter, bacteria goes right to town on it. But fats, oils, and grease is very difficult. So when you get any fog in the bottom of a muck layer, bacteria just slows right down, slows right down. ELI has developed biology that likes fats. And they put it in treatment plants to break down fats. But they're very aggressive with working with fats. So they're able to deal with that. And the other thing that happens with bacteria is the bacteria will denitrify. So it'll take ammonia, which is NH3, we'll turn that into NO2 and release a hydrogen molecule. It'll convert that. A different bacteria will take it to nitrate, and then from nitrate, they denitrify it. So when you convert nitrate, NO3, you denitrify, you're releasing nitrogen gas to the atmosphere. So the byproduct is water and nitrogen gas. And what's interesting about the biology, it's capable of anoxic respiration. What anoxic respiration means simply is that you don't need free oxygen for your energy. You can respire or breathe using oxygen that's tied up chemically. Bacteria that's capable of aerobic respiration, and in farmlands, we're trying to get aerobic activity going on because that's where all the health is. Everything aerobic is healthy. Everything anaerobic is associated with disease. You think of anything rotting is anaerobic. So bacteria that is capable of aerobic respiration has an ATP level of 38. ATP is the energy that cells need to absorb food, okay? Anaerobic bacteria has an ATP of 2. They're very, very slow. They have very low energy. But when we put this bacteria that's capable of anoxic respiration into the muck layer, it has an ATP of 34. It's very aggressive. It's down there working really hard because it has the energy to do it. So that's why we're able to get this really fast consumption of nutrients in the muck layer, because this bacteria is capable of anoxic respiration. Basically taking the oxygen molecule off of nitrate. This is the phase of what bacteria goes through. When we first put it out, there's a lag phase, and then it gets going. It starts, eating food. So it goes through the log phase of explosive growth. Bacteria will grow like crazy to meet the food supply. That's why when we put organic GEM out, all this protein into the ground, bacteria explodes because it's growing to meet the food demand. Once it's met the food demand, like it's eating the food input, they have kind of a stationary phase. Everybody's happy. But as soon as the food slows down for whatever reason, bacteria will die. They go through lysis. And this is where the photosynthetic bacteria will step in, because it doesn't need the food source to work. It just needs sunlight and CO2. And as they die and give up their nutrients, they continue to work on it and denitrify. And that is the key to why this works. So how we were able to use this here in the US, this technology is used widely in Asia. What they're doing, ELI went over and built a big plant in China. China, as you know, has got all kinds of environmental problems, all kinds of pollution problems. What they're doing in China is, what they've discovered is, if they take this biology and put it in a river, they'll take a section of the river, and the section's only 30, 40 yards long. They treat that section constantly with this biology, constantly keeping it in there. So as the nutrient-dense water comes down to this point in the river, all the nutrient gets taken up there and denitrified. So the water coming to this small point in the river is loaded with nutrient. Below the river, it's clean, or low in nitrogen anyway. So they built a huge factory with the government of China, and that's where they've done most of their work. They've also done their work in Canada, because Canada's DEP recognized we have a big problem with agricultural runoff. Come and do it. But here in the United States, we have a DEP and an EPA, very conservative. But what they were able to convince the DEP in Florida is, give us this canal in Florida to treat. Florida, as I showed you, has all kinds of problems with nutrient runoff. This canal, and it's called Cabot Cove, and it's in Cape Coral, Florida, was the nastiest canal in southern Florida. So the state said, here you go. Here's the canal. We'll let you do it. So the baseline pollution in this was extremely high. You could see from these pictures just how dark and how nutrient loaded this canal is here. I don't know if you can see this here, but this canal was so matted with algae, there's an alligator in the middle there. The alligator's not swimming, he's walking on the algae mat. This is how bad Cabot Canal was. So the baseline data here, and here's a better picture of him walking on the algae mat. The end of the canal had 6 to 10 inches of depth and a very, very high COD, chemical oxygen demand, high nutrient loading. So the baseline started in the upper left. This is just after 6 days. You can see the water getting clearer. The lower left is after 11 days, and the lower right here is after 13 days. Dramatic, tremendous reduction of nutrient loading in this canal. Now, mind you, ELI, it's a small canal. It was easy to manage. They went at it aggressively. But this could show you what can be done with an aggressive treatment in just 13 days. So you can see on the left is where they started. This is the same spot. And here on the right, I think, is only 90 days later. That algae mat's all gone. Here's an aerial picture of the canal. So they had to put a turbidity screen at the bottom. The state was very worried about this biology getting away. We can't contaminate all of Florida waters. So they had to put a turbidity screen there to catch any biology to make sure it didn't leave that section. So you can see how they're holding back. And there's still nutrients here at the bottom, but at the upper level of the pond, it's a lot cleaner than tremendously improved from what it was originally. This work right here convinced the DEP of Florida that, okay, we got to start using this. So this happened in 2016, 2017. And in 2018, the DEP issued them a letter of no objection. You can start using this. And so I took that letter of non-objection to the state of Massachusetts after the fish kill in Buttonwood Pond and said, look, we're doing this in Florida, we got to do this here in Massachusetts. And this project was key in the United States to convince the government that they could do it. So it has spawned all kinds of projects that they're currently doing in Florida. They have a big one in Jacksonville that right now they're doing 18 ponds. 9 of them are controls and 9 of them are treatment. That's all being paid for by a combination of the DEP and the DOT in Florida. So it's a research project they're paying for, but they're expanding the work done in Florida. I highlighted Buttonwood Pond because that's what we're doing here in Massachusetts. And then below that, Occum Pond, which the other thing that when I went to Massachusetts, I showed them, hey, this is what they're doing in China. This is what they're doing in Florida. And the same thing with farmers. I go to a farmer in Minnesota, and I say, hey, you got to use organic GEM because these guys are having great success in Massachusetts. And Southern California, everybody uses it. Like, yeah, but that's not my environment. I got to see it here in my environment. So part of convincing the state was showing them that, hey, we already did this at Dartmouth College back in 2006 to 2008. Dartmouth College had a pond, Occum Pond, about the same size as Buttonwood, 9 or 10 acres, through heavy eutrophication. And they set a set of objectives. They wanted to reduce the odor. When you have a lot of muck on the bottom of a pond, you can even get hydrogen sulfide production. It smells like rotten eggs. So Occum Pond smelled, and it's right around student housing. And the pond looked awful, smelled terrible. So they wanted to improve the water quality, reduce the odors, reduce the nutrient levels, and reduce green water events, which is algae blooms. So here's a picture of Occum Pond at Dartmouth College. Here is ELI doing their first applications to it. The little John boat, just similar to the way we were doing it. So on the left are the starting photos. We don't have a tremendous amount of data from Dartmouth because their students did everything. They went out and did the testing, wrote the report. It was all internally at Dartmouth. It was a 3-year project. After 2 years, Dartmouth said, we're all set, the pond's clean. We've met our objectives. So these are pictures that ELI took during the application process. You can see the color of the water on the left. And you can see, this is in 2006. In 2008, you can see how clean the water is. And after the second year, like I said, Dartmouth said, project's over. We restored the pond. What they didn't do, though, is they did not solve why it eutrophied in the first place. So my niece is a freshman at Dartmouth, and I need to go back to revisit the pond to see if we need to address the nutrient loading. But the most dramatic thing that they found right away at Occum Pond, and we've seen it at Buttonwood Pond, it works everywhere we take this technology, is a dramatic reduction in sediment depth. The muck layer in the bottom gets knocked down. So we put the biology in the pond. If there's floating nutrient, it attaches right to it. And it starts eating the nutrient, and it makes it heavier, and then it drops into the muck layer, and then starts breaking down in the muck layer. So they started off with 14 inches average muck layer depth at the beginning of the project, year 1 in 2006. That was in May, when we normally start applications here in the north. By the end of August, that muck layer was down to 2 inches. So a dramatic reduction in muck layer. So Dartmouth decided that they had achieved 90% of their restoration goals after 2 years. Got rid of the odor, improved the water quality, reduced the muck layer, obviously, lowered the nutrient levels, and eliminated green water events. So that was a big success. So really short, I want to go over, so once you get the water clean, you have to do something about the nutrient loading. And this is where we use organic GEM fertilizer and a catalyst for it. When farmers put nitrogen out, it is well known that 50 to 80% of it either gases off in the atmosphere or leaches out. When they put nitrates out, they're highly leachable, easily to be leached. When they put ammonium out, it's easily volatile. So 50 to 80% of all the nitrogen they're putting on is going into the atmosphere. When you put organic GEM out, and we like to put it out with biology from ELI and some molasses, some carbon, we put that out, and we've proven this at the university level. It does not leach at all. It's very sticky, stays right in the root zone and goes to work right there and converts immediately to soil biology. Doesn't go anywhere. So that one step of just exchanging your petrochemical nitrogen fertilizer for protein and molasses and a little bit of biology, you can eliminate all of that runoff from your lawn and any farms that grow. This is a big deal right here. Nitrogen bans have been in place for a long time. Hudson Valley has had one since the early 2000s. Florida has had a nitrogen ban for years. And there's one on Martha's Vineyard that they have never enforced. So they're trying to enforce it for the first time in 2020. What it is during the summer season when you have algae blooms, they don't want you to use any fertilizer. They don't want you to have any runoff. So these are now being enforced, and that is a big boom to our industry. And then, real quick, this is farming. We put biology onto crop residue to break it down. If you drive across the center of this country in the wintertime, you'll see all these cornfields with stubble everywhere, and it oxidizes off. You put our product on there, and then till it in. That's what this farmer's doing here. They're spraying organic GEM and molasses on the front and then tilling it under. We grow biology. Worms eat biology, so that brings worms in. Worms turn that into vermicompost. So the most successful farmers in this country all either cover crop or disc in their leaf trash. When I drive across Nebraska, whatever, I go crazy, to see they're letting this nutrient, just dry out and return to the atmosphere when they should be putting it into plant life. And so this is Martha's Vineyard, all kinds of water. We're working with them because 60% of the nutrient loading is from septic tanks. And what we do with septic tanks is we put our product in the distribution box. So as it comes out of the septic tank, the urine, the gray water, we treat it in that distribution box. So as it goes out through the leach field, the biology is converting it to nitrogen gas. So our three-stage process is to clean the water, control the nutrient input in terms of fertilizer and biobarriers, and then to treat human waste. And this is the EPA's thing. And it's my last slide. I just want to just tell the story real quick. I got a call in 2010. Said, hey, Jeff, you're in the New York Times today. I said, I hope I'm not in trouble. And they said, oh, no, it's a great article. In 2008 or 9, the state of New York said, no more pesticides on any state land. They're banned, right? Well, Cornell stood up and said, they were the first ones to say, hey, we got sports fields. I got to have pesticides. I can't have great fields and no pesticide. Got an exemption. And then these other golf courses got exemptions, other universities. It ended up being that every single pesticide user in the state got an exemption, right, from the state, except one. The Peggy Rockefeller Rose Garden at the New York Botanical Gardens, funded by Peggy Rockefeller, she lobbied to get the pesticide law passed. So she went down to New York Botanical Garden and said, you're not going to use pesticide. So they did. They stopped using pesticides. So in 2010, New York Times says, how are you guys complying? They went there to do an article. How are you able to comply with this law? Nobody else can. And they said, well, we use integrated pest management. We use a lot of compost in here, but we would not be able to do it without organic GEM. And it was really startling. But what they said when they took the reporter through the rose garden, they say, our problem is with midge. Midge is a little insect that lays its eggs in the soil. And when the babies grow, they come up and eat the rose bush. He said, we have midge all through this rose garden, but it's not affecting the plants. The plants are healthy. They're resisting it. And I wanted to bring that up because, when you think of this, it's impossible to do this. It's impossible to do this. It's not. You've got to put the right mindset with it, the right tools, and stay with it, and you can achieve these high goals.
Thank you so much. A few questions from the audience? One or two?
Hi, I was just wondering about the fats-eating bacteria that you mentioned. Is that like being developed as a product similar to these?
Yeah, Eli has a product specifically to go into grease traps. And right now they're selling it to heavy industrial users that have lift stations. They're in towns that have lift stations with grease problems.
What's that called? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know what they call it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what,
That's separate.
yeah, I don't deal with it, so I don't know what it is, but I know part of that is in this product.
So this was really fascinating. You touched on so many things that I've thought about, and this last slide is really kind of intriguing. And so the idea that you can use these kinds of products to build microbial life that actually ends up helping protect plants is not a new concept, but it's really cool to see it being applied in so many different ways. So I wanted to thank you again for your really stimulating talk and the diverse ways that you can use these different kinds of technologies to clean up. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.